So, The Matrix, 1999, directed by the Wachowskis. Darren, this was a big one in the 90s. And
Mhm.
I know this was my pick since this is the last episode of our 90s Palooza season. Um, you had wanted to ask Robert Yaniz to join us because it's his favorite movie. And so
Right.
there he is, Robert Yaniz Jr. Thanks for joining us. We appreciate you coming on again.
Yeah.
It's been a while since we last saw you. What was the episode you were on last time with us?
An American Tail, I
Oh,
believe.
that's right.
Another franchise starter.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's been at least probably a year, right? When we did that one. It's been a while.
Yeah, year and a half. I think I was freshly moved in to this house and I've been living here almost, yeah, like a year and a half or so, something like that.
Oh, very cool.
Hmm.
Sunny
So
tropical Florida. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
you're one of the hosts on Crooked Table podcast, correct?
That's correct.
How is that going right now?
It's going. I have so at Critical Table Productions, we have two podcasts. We have Close Watch, where we get to know our guests through the movies they love. And we have Franchise Detours, where we believe no movie series travels in a straight line. And on that one, as of this recording, we're about to finish Planet of the Apes and kind of heading into a short break, and then X-Men, 10 X-Men movies. Everything but New Mutants, which doesn't really exist, let's be honest,
Ouch.
and the Deadpool. So
Okay.
yeah, so that should be an interesting ride.
Yeah, that sounds like fun. Did you like the second Deadpool? Were you a fan of that one?
I I like elements of it. I like the first one better. I think
Okay.
I think it's madness every once in a while when I see people that are like, we all know Deadpool 2 is better, don't we? There's people on Twitter that just assume everyone's opinion is theirs. It's just really funny
Yeah.
to me.
I like the Princess Bride version of Deadpool too. I really like that
I
one.
missed that. I've
It's
always
really
been
funny.
curious to just check it out, and I don't really even know if it's available anywhere. They need to just throw that up on Disney Plus.
They should. Yeah, it's PG-13. Like, why wouldn't they? Well, they
Yeah,
have the
yeah,
R one.
exactly,
Anyway.
exactly.
Yeah, that'd be good. Well, we're grateful you came on again because, like Darren told me, this is your favorite movie, and
It is.
it's one of mine too, most likely. I mean, I haven't really thought about it too closely recently, but it's up there. This is one of my favorite movies, probably. Um, so that's why I thought it'd be a great one to end our season with. Like I said, it's a big one. It was one that kind of changed the game for filmmaking. That
Mhm.
introduced some new techniques, and it was kind of groundbreaking.
Yeah.
And so I want to talk about that for sure. But Robert, real quick, give us your history with the movie and how did it become your favorite?
I feel like that's sort of just kind of it evolved over time, because I saw this in theaters when it came out. I was, already a Keanu Reeves fan. I knew you guys already covered Speed. That was already something I was a fan of. The Bill and Ted movies, things like that. So it was already on my radar. And I don't know if you guys remember, the marketing of this thing was really playing up the mystery of what is the Matrix. That was the website and everything. What is the
Yeah.
Matrix.com?
Yeah.
They didn't reveal anything about the real plot twist in the marketing, which I could never imagine happening now. Like, that would just be in the trailer. That would be the selling point for the movie nowadays. But they
Yeah.
didn't tell you anything about it. It's just all this cool imagery, in the real world and the Matrix, just kind of all blended together. So I went to see it and I had no idea what to expect. And mind you, when this thing came out, I'm 15 going on 16. And so my movie going experience up to that point was lots of, Disney movies, lots of like comedies, lots of like, the Arnold and Stallone and that kind of action film, Commando, Demolition Man, all that kind of stuff. So I wasn't really prepared for something on that level. I wasn't prepared for something that was going to sort of change my perspective in a lot of ways. It it really kind of woke me up to the craft of movie making, to I didn't know anything about philosophy and spirituality and
Yeah.
the blending of all these different things, because what this movie is and why I think it really has endured the way that it has is not only Lana and Lilly Wachowski's direction, which we'll get into more, but it's also just kind of a soup of genres. They put everything. If you watch this thing with a close eye, there is pretty much every genre sort of hat tipped to or homaged. Western. I would even say there's some horror in here. Certainly noir. So it took a lot of martial arts. It took a lot of those things that the Wachowskis were into, and it's sort of a nexus point for all this cool stuff. But then at the same time, when you go revisit it, it's not like a lot of movies from this era that are more like cyber thrillery. It's not diminishing returns. It actually becomes kind of a richer experience the more you watch it. So it was a big one on VHS when during that era for me. And then when the sequels and everything came out later, I was just fully on board for that entire experience, which we'll get into later.
Yeah. That's great. For me as well, like I went into it blind too. I didn't know what to expect. And it kind of caught me off guard as well. I was seeing things I've never seen before. I was kind of like, I was blown away. And for a while, I just kind of was like, what was that? What did I watch? What did I they make any sense? Like I couldn't even make any sense out of it.
Yeah.
Darren, you and I think we saw it together for the first time, right? So I think we share the same history with.
No, actually, I saw it with my wife first, and then I think we went back and saw it with you.
All right, go ahead and tell us what your experience was.
Well, it was the same thing, Robert. You're absolutely right. It's like it kept it. I think this and the Blair Witch Project had the two best marketing campaigns this year, just because of how they kept everything secret. And it became like an event that you had to be a part of. And so, yeah, you walk in, and I imagine, talking about it again with my wife last night, I imagine it's like what Star Wars felt like more than anything else that had come out since Star Wars. I think because this is a pastiche, right? Just like you were talking about. It's a mix of everything, but it kind of throws them in a blender, and it turns that blender on like full blast, and it becomes something new. And so, like, yeah, there were parts like I was blown away. Obviously, the action. I remember literally the part with the exploding helicopter where it kind of ripples the building out.
Yeah.
And my wife and I both like, whoa, like at the same time, because we'd never, it was just like your eyes popped, right? But I think the first time I saw it, I was kind of like hoity-toity, like film snob kind of, because all the references and stuff, like there's literally a part, when they're torturing Morpheus and they look outside and the helicopter raises, and I'm like, that's True Lies, right? Like you could pick like different. Or I think like, and you could just pick any, you could pick all these different things, but I was like hoity-toity, but it reminds me of this, or it reminds me of that. So it's not wholly original, right? Even though like the action and stuff blows you away. But like, and again, we'll get into it, but the obviously the is it Wachowski or Wachowski? How are we pronouncing that?
I would say Wachowski.
And okay, we apologize to Lily and Lana if we go ahead and we keep messing up their names, but the Wachowskis, obviously they came from Bound and stuff like that, and so they're breaking new ground. But just their story, that you find out what their story was and their input, and then just the way that it kind of rippled, just like that building, the exploding helicopter, it rippled out and affected so many things. I think it's just grown to the point where I can look at it and I can maybe describe it as a masterpiece, because it's got what I look for in a masterpiece, this underlying theme or underlying point that's underneath all the other cool surface level stuff, which we'll talk about. So even though I didn't love it, I love parts of it, but I wasn't enraptured by it like I'm enraptured now. So that's another sign of a great movie, right? Is it grows in your estimation over time. So.
And you mentioned Star Wars there, and this came out the same year as The Phantom Menace. And just obviously The Phantom Menace made way more money. Star Wars is way more accessible. This is an R-rated action thriller. It beat Phantom Menace to the Oscar for best visual effects that year. It clearly stole a lot of the attention and the influence, and shaped the genre going forward in a way that film didn't necessarily. And it was also part of it was hitting on a lot of things that I guess were really in the zeitgeist at the time, because there was this whole string of movies from that year that are all like, oh man, screw the system. I don't need this 9 to 5, Office Space, Fight Club, American Beauty. All came out the same year, that were all like, yeah, let's get out of your cubicle prison, free your mind. It's all of that kind of thing. And so it was just something timed perfectly well with what was going on in the culture. And also to your point about being sort of a pastiche, if you're not familiar with a lot of those things, you don't even notice them. And like I said, at 15 years old, I hadn't seen Ghost in the Shell. I was on the Stu World Order podcast recently, like to talk about that, and I was like, oh, so that's where Lana and Lilly got like the holes in the back of the neck and a lot of like the sort of imagery, but I hadn't seen that at the point. So at that point, so in that way, The Matrix is also like the perfect gateway to all those different genres too, for young cinephiles like myself.
Johnny, let me ask you a question too, because I know that we watched Phantom Menace in the theater too. I think we'd all seen it, and you were like, "Well, I want to watch it," so we went to go see that. Like, you not being a diehard Star Wars fan, how did The Matrix compare to Star Wars: The Phantom Menace? Because I'm maybe one of the few defenders of Phantom Menace. I think it's fine as a kids movie, and there are parts that wow me, but compared to The Matrix, it's like this is old hat. Like it, you know what I mean? It like The Matrix is this wave of the future, and Star Wars was a relic of the past. Like, Johnny, what did you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it doesn't really compare. I would pick The Matrix over Star Wars Phantom Menace any day. Like
Yeah.
I prefer that movie 10 times over any Star Wars movie, really. But that's just because I'm not a huge Star Wars guy
Yeah.
or Star Wars and that. But as far as the technique goes, they were both got some, some good stuff going on, and I thought there's some great fight choreography in Star Wars Phantom Menace. There's also some great fight choreography in The Matrix too. So they both had some really good things they were doing at the time. So they both did their job well. But I would pick The Matrix any day of the week.
Yeah, and then it's just I don't know, man. Like, Robert, you're talking about like it opens your eyes or mind to philosophy and all these things. And what's the saying? It's like if you've never seen
I still have this book.
There you go. Yeah,
I still have this book, The Matrix and Philosophy.
That's so cool, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
it inspired all these writings and religions. But like
For sure.
the saying is that if you've never seen the ocean, of course a puddle looks deep, that kind of thing. But as opposed to something like Joker, which I think is like, I don't know, like I watched Joker and it's like, that's okay, but it's like, there's nothing, it doesn't even reach any kind of heights or try for anything. It just tries to be a copy. But The Matrix, I don't think that applies because The Matrix is so deep and it's so layered. You know what I'm talking about? That I don't think that saying applies to it. I think that, like I said, The Matrix over these years, what is it, 24 years now? It's still, watching it again, it still like feels fresh because when you break ground, it's always going to feel like it's fresh. It's always going to feel new. I think that's a main draw of this movie, I think.
Also, I listened to your guys' Speed episode prior to coming on for this discussion. You guys mentioned described Keanu there as earnest. I would say that about the Wachowskis too. Like, you can tell that their intention here is pure, that they really have passion for this stuff. They're not like, oh, let's just put a bunch of stuff together and sell it to the kids. Like, there's a heart behind that. There's a passion and there's a heart behind this whole thing. There was ahead of Resurrections, Keanu, I think, said that he was really on board with the script and describing it as a love story. In a lot of ways, this whole franchise has been a love story. This is a movie that starts with like a very noir-esque chase sequence and wire work and all of that, and ends with a Sleeping Beauty-esque fairy tale kiss before the hero takes off into the sky. And I think that there's something authentic and genuine about the love that they have for these characters, but also all those different types of storytelling.
Yeah. Hey, Darren, you mentioned Bound, and I want to talk about that real quick because wasn't that kind of their dry run for The Matrix? Like I heard they wanted to do The Matrix originally, but the studios wouldn't give them the money for it. So they pitched Bound and were able to kind of like practice and kind of like, because you see a lot of the same shots in Bound that you see in The Matrix. And I saw Bound after I saw The Matrix. I was like, wait a minute, that's the same shot in The Matrix. It's the same, same like pattern of the floor. Everything was the same rain dripping down, all that kind of stuff. But so I like that they were able to do that. They were able to go and practice and like rehearse what it'd be like to make something of that caliber before they actually went and did it.
Well, I think the chronology is they sold their script for Assassins, the Sylvester Stallone Antonio Banderas movie, to Warner Brothers, and then Leo de Bonaventura. I'm not going to pronounce his name right. Anyway, so based on the strength of that script that they sold, he signed them on for Bound and The Matrix, and so they were able, the Wachowskis were able to kind of spin this to direct The Matrix. And again, Robert, you hit on that. They've got a passion for this, and it's not just. I mentioned that they're throwing everything into a blender, right? But it's with a purpose. It's not just let's see what sticks. Everything is like, I said that it's kind of ripping off True Lies and all these other things, but that's the point of the movie. It's like you're fed these images from other movies or other stories, and it's kind of like your dreams. You make them come alive in a way. So I think that's another strength too. But it's like, they were the only directors for this movie because they knew it inside and out, and they made it again so fresh. And Bound, you're right, Johnny. It's like you can watch Bound and then watch this, and it's like these are the same people that made this movie. it's got the same kind of style and energy to it.
Yeah, and Joe Pantoliano is in both of them.
Yep.
Very similar, like the noir elements that are in this movie you see sort of distilled out from the sci-fi in Bound. And to your point, Darren, like they had storyboarded a lot of this. Like they had basically drawn this movie as almost a comic book in a way before they ever put a camera to it. And
they went to Geoff Darrow and Steve Scroce, and I'm not gonna pronounce these names, but they did get comic book artists to actually draw those. You're right.
Yeah. And there's just something too with the story that it's the wish fulfillment element, right?
Yeah.
It's Luke Skywalker looking off at the binary sunset and being like, oh man, I wish I could have adventures in space. Or Harry Potter being like, maybe I could be a wizard. You watch this and you're like sitting at your computer at your desk at work or wherever, working for a software company, and you're like, could I be a freedom fighter? Am I the one? It's that kind of thing. You can sort of apply yourself to that, and it's that sort of escapism that I think really works.
Well, the surface level stuff, like I mentioned, Star Wars, this is the monomyth. This is the hero's journey. It's the same story as Luke Skywalker, and it's so universal that you can latch onto that. And so, all the surface level action, Ghost in the Shell kind of, cyberpunk stuff. That's the surface that everybody can enjoy. But again, there are some deeper things going on that's fascinating once you dive deeper into that matrix, I guess.
Yeah. Did anybody else like dive into it and like start watching the Animatrix and kind of go into the history of it? Like after it came out, like I kind of went crazy and started looking into everything about the Matrix, and I watched all those, makings of, and as well as the Animatrix and stuff too. Did you guys do that as well?
I did. I definitely did. I still have the Animatrix on DVD. I had the Matrix Revisited, the feature-length behind the scenes documentary that they did on this film. Obviously the sequels, Enter the Matrix, the video game, then they had the Path of Neo also on play. Like I was fully on board. Basically everything other than the Matrix Online I was into, and I was fully on board.
Did you have the screensaver, the code screensaver on your computer?
Yeah, absolutely, of course.
Of course, why not?
I had that shot at the end of the movie when he after he dies and is reborn and sees the hallway with the agents and code. That was my wallpaper on my laptop for the longest time.
Yeah.
Nice.
And I did dive into the Animatrix. Is strange because I like the idea, but there are some images in there, especially when they go through the war. There are some images that I wish I'd never seen, and like I can't get out of my brain, like humans being ripped apart and stuff like that. I was like, I don't need that, but I do like all the different like ideas of like a haunted house is just a glitch in the Matrix or all.
Right.
And so I dove into that in preparation for the sequels, but I never got into the games or anything. That's just not my thing, but I do admire that they did that. And again, me being the stupid film snob, it was like, people are like, oh, it's so complicated, I need to go see it again so I can understand it. I'm like, guys, if it's green, it's the Matrix. If it's blue, it's the real world. What's so hard about that? You know what I mean? But it's still a cool color aesthetic. And it's so cool. And I just like everything about this is just so well thought out. I don't know, like maybe not well thought out because there are critics of this movie, but I do like that it is thought out. There is some thought put into this movie that again makes it last, makes it like even wow you today. So
I remember too being really wowed by, like I said before, the choreography and the fight scenes. Like that was something that was like, wow, that was awesome. And to hear that they put all that training into getting into shape and learning the moves and working with martial artists and stuff like that, that was really impressive for me to be like, how cool would that be to spend 6 months of your life getting into shape and learning kung fu so you can do it on the camera. But I think it's also really impressive that Fishburne and Keanu Reeves would be able to do that. That's awesome.
Right. Well, we have to mention Yuan Wu Ping, right?
I was just about to say, yes, exactly.
Tell us about him, Robert.
Yeah, so he's a legend. He's a legend in Hong Kong cinema, choreographer, director, and all of that. And it's interesting because I feel like looking back, this movie might have had some influence over the fact that now everyone who plays a superhero or is doing some kind of physically intensive role, a lot of them now train for 6 months, like they learn all the moves, as opposed to, I feel like there was more of a reliance on stunt doubles before this. Now you have Keanu Reeves in wires, now, you have now everyone like plays a Marvel hero is like working out and like doing, so you know what I mean? Like I feel that was happening before, but you had either two kinds of action heroes, the people who came in for their close-ups, and then everything else was the stuntmen, or stunt performers, and then the action stars who were martial artists and just brought that to the screen. This is, I feel like, was one of the big major first instances of taking Hollywood movie stars and turning them into at least screen accurate martial artists, where you had Hugo Weaving like training in fight choreography with Keanu Reeves and Carrie-Anne Moss and Lawrence Fishburne. And I think it feels like this was one of the big, pushes for that to sort of go mainstream.
Yeah, Tom Cruise even took that ball and ran with it, right?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if like he was inspired by the Matrix, but it's still the same thing. It's like we're wowed by seeing these actors actually go through this and perform these stunts, and they can do it. Like you just got to find the physicality, right? I like that Yuan Wu-ping, he even like when he choreographed the fights, he would choreograph them to the strength of the actors, like depending on what they could do. And then hearing that Reeves, like I think he dislocated his shoulder, he did some stuff where he hurt his back, and Hugo Weaving hurt his hip and stuff like that. So they were really getting into it. I know Carrie-Anne Moss like broke her leg when training for the second one, but like they were passionate about it too. It's funny watching this movie and just knowing that the Wachowskis were just so passionate about the story, and that passion fed into everybody else, and everybody else had that same passion for everything that they were doing. It's inspirational to watch something like that.
Yeah, I think Keanu. Oh, sorry, Johnny. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna add to that I think Keanu at one point was injured to the point that he couldn't really kick, which is why he doesn't kick very much in this movie. It's just he was like kind of pushing through his injuries during production, which I think is crazy.
We all know that Keanu's a stud. Yeah.
Yeah. He does have that really cool roundhouse kick that just impressed the crap out of me. I was going to ask real quick, what's your favorite fight scene? Do you have a favorite in the movie? Because I have a favorite. Do you guys have a favorite fight scene?
Yeah.
You do?
I do. What about you, Robert?
I like the Smith and Neo thing, but I'm always in any of these franchises, I'm always a big fan of the good versus evil, the big themes. In Star Wars, I love the Jedi and the Sith more than I do the bounty hunters, the Mandalorians, and all that stuff, which is part of why I'm like kind of indifferent on a lot of the TV series that they've done with that franchise. And I we'll get into it later briefly, but I love what they do with Neo and Smith and their connection going forward in the franchise. I just watching a character, having a machine character that's gradually turning human and hates it with every fiber of his being is so satisfying to watch. And at the same time, you're watching a person sort of become more like the machine. It's that, again, it's the dichotomy. It's, that these movies mess with. Well, does everything have to be binary? And obviously that was in part because the Wachowskis were, I think at that time already sort of feeling like they wanted to transition down the line. So you could see some of that theme coming through there. But yeah, just it's the moment the whole movie's been leading up to, that fight in the subway station.
Right. But that's a great scene. I love that scene.
Johnny, what about you? What's yours? I don't want to.
Oh, man, my favorite is when he first learns kung fu and they go to the program to fight for the first time, and Mouse is like, Morpheus is Neo. And the energy
they run.
It's so great. I love watching that scene. It's so fun.
Well, I think I've got to pick, even though it's I'm conflicted about it because it's weird. I'm going to pick the lobby fight because it's just so, that's the iconic scene, right? It's that's the part where you're like, oh yeah, this movie's awesome, that kind of thing. And I guess I'm conflicted. My question for you guys is, are those security guards, are those innocent people that are plugged into the Matrix that they're just slaughtering?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. I'm always kind of like, well, it's cool, but
exactly. No, I know. It's, and I've covered this movie on when I Close Watch before it turned into Close Watch was Crooked Table Podcast. And when I did episode 100 of that, I covered this movie and I did a 2-part with my brother, who it's also his favorite movie. And we talked about that, about how watching that now, the movie's pretty clear that inside the world of the Matrix itself, they're viewed as terrorists. So you're sort of watching a terrorist attack and rooting for the terrorists. That's what I mean. In the world of the Matrix, we know different, but it does put you in that weird place of, wait, which side am I rooting for? Do I like, what is it? How does this work exactly? And so that, especially knowing this came out like what, a couple of weeks, I think, before Columbine, and this was one of the things that people were pointing to, like the long trench coats and all of that, as sort of helping to inspire the aesthetic or whatever of that. So in that way, it hasn't aged well, but it's also like you can look at it as sort of a, I don't know. I almost wonder, so much of this movie is so deep and rich and like you were saying, well thought out. It almost feels to me like, is it a commentary on how when you're fighting the system, how you're perceived as, you know, it feels like you're doing something wrong, or like it feels like you're breaking the rules, and it is kind of like doing something drastic like what they do in this movie. I don't know. I'm trying to square that, but I have similar difficulties with that sequence because of the innocent lives lost. But Morpheus makes it very clear, if you're not one of us, you're one of them.
Well,
So,
in a way that makes it interesting.
Yeah.
Something to talk about. It's not just again, it can be surface level stuff. I bet there are people that haven't even thought about that. Like, that's not even because cool gunfights, slow-mo kicks, you know, that kind of thing. But that there is always this undercurrent of something else going on besides what you're seeing on the surface.
Absolutely.
So, Rob, usually we all kind of pick a topic and bring something to the show, like what we want to talk about. Is there anything specific that you want to bring up and talk about?
Well, one thing that I did want to mention that I think is interesting. So obviously there's some elements of this movie that feel very 1999, the sort of breaking out of your cubicle kind of thing, that element that I already mentioned. Also, you have like the Rob Zombie song playing in there, and some of the technology and things like that. Does that make this movie feel dated at all for either of you?
For me, no, because I guess it's just technology. Like, you could be plugged into the Matrix and have any kind of timeline, right? You could be, you know, so it doesn't really matter to me. I mean, obviously technology is going to change, but again, I think it's the story ideas are so out there that it and ahead of their time that I think it kind of surpasses all of that stuff. I don't know, Johnny, what do you think?
Just the fact that his computer isn't like a dated computer, and the disc, the hard drives that he's using and stuff like that, you know, they're like kind of floppy disks, aren't they? Or they're kind of like those little smaller, harder ones. Maybe that kind of stuff makes it a little bit dated, but like I agree with you though. I think it kind of doesn't really matter because it is, you know, it's a sci-fi movie, so you kind of like you accept what you're seeing anyway, no matter what it is.
Yeah,
I think it also gets away with it a little bit because the Matrix itself is a simulation. It's almost supposed to be like a cliched version of what the Machines thing 1999 was like, to a degree. So they kind of like have their cake and eat it too a little bit there. The real world,
that's exactly what I was getting at. Yeah,
it's the peak of your civilization. So I feel like it's timeless in that way. And then, you know, I know you guys wanted to talk about the sort of trans allegory part of it on the part of the Wachowskis. Did either of you clock the fact that I think there's something to be said of the similarities in appearance between Neo and Trinity in this film? I think you have Keanu Reeves, who has got gentler features, Carrie-Anne Moss, who has harder features, you know, sort of both kind of meeting in the middle. There's that androgynous sort of line going on there. And then the character of Switch, which was supposed to be played by two different actors. One would have been a man and one a woman in the Matrix, to sort of really drive that home. How does that part of the story and you know, the deeper meaning of this film work for you?
Johnny, what do you think?
I never really thought about it. Like, honestly, like that never really crossed my mind. I didn't know that was their plan. I had no idea that was what they were going to do, using a male actor in the. Was that true? That's what they were going to do?
Yeah. I don't know if they decided against it because they didn't want to like hammer the nail on the head, you know, to make it too obvious.
Right.
But so here's my thing, and I'm trying to tread very lightly here. Okay. Like I compare it to Frozen. So the Let It Go became this kind of gay anthem for homosexuals or the LGBTQ, that movement, right? And that's great. Latch onto that. But that's not all that it can be. Like, it's not just about that. What's great is that it can be about that. But it's also like you could like Dragon Ball Z and like want to and just, you know, fly that freak flag. It's like, yeah, do that. Like, don't be afraid to be who you are, right? I don't like the idea of tying it down just to one thing, because when you do that, you eliminate people from enjoying the movie. If you tell somebody this is the only way that the movie is supposed to be viewed, somebody's going to, well, I don't view it that, and they're going to turn off, right? They'll go watch something else. What I think is great, what I think makes this masterpiece level, is when you hear the Wachowskis talk about that. And yeah, they were going through some stuff when they were making this movie, and that's all there. It's about living in a world that you know is not right, and you just want to scream and fight back and become who you are, right? Which is Neo's journey. But it could also be different things. Like, you could just watch it as a surface level hero's journey. You could just watch it as an allegory, like you're talking about, for breaking free of just anything. But what I love is that it is a personal story that both the Wachowskis were telling, trying to get out of their system. And that, to me, is what makes this movie masterpiece level, because there is that undercurrent of a deeper feeling. But what makes it great, and I compare it to something like RoboCop, which on the surface, RoboCop is just this dumb, stupid action, sci-fi, comic booky revenge story. But underneath it, there's all this Reaganomics stuff, and there's this like anti-violence stuff. And that could also be viewed as a transgender thing. It's a trans identity thing. But on the surface, it's one thing. On a deeper level, if you're looking for it, and it's not just us trying to read into it, because it's there. Like, when you hear Lana and Lilly talk about this, it's all there, and from the first, I think the first graphic, it actually says trans, like, it's meaning transmission, but it says trans, right? And so it's all these things that are there if you're looking for it, and it just gives the movie extra meaning. But you don't have to enjoy it for that. You can still enjoy it for the surface level stuff. It's funny when you tell people, because the Wachowskis can say this is a trans narrative, it's about our trans identity, and they'll tell people that, and the people will go, you don't know. Like, they're telling the creators, you don't know what your story is. So it's just weird, but that's not what they're saying. I think they're just saying this is what the story means to us, but they put it out there, and there's all this cool, awesome stuff that's happening that kind of your lizard brain that's the stuff you latch onto, and that's great. So there is that meaning that's there, and that's hardlined into the movie. But if you don't want to, you don't have to focus on it. I just like that that's a part of this movie. And that's what makes it more of a cultural icon than something else that's just fun on the surface.
It's really hard not to talk about Resurrections now, because there's literally a scene in that movie where they're sitting in the room with the character that created the Matrix. Essentially talking about this stuff, saying, oh, it's a trans allegory. It's, capitalist exploitation and all this stuff. And it's funny too that the whole red pill thing has gotten co-opted by the right wingers, and it's kind of like They Live. I was on Green Run to talk about They Live, John Carpenter film, obviously, and it similarly was not made with the intention that a lot of people who are appropriating it are applying to it. I think it's kind of funny how, every once in a while the Wachowskis will be like, yeah, no, get off our lawn, kind of thing. Like, get off that's not what we meant by that. So please don't take our works and use them for belief systems that are complete opposite to everything we stand for.
Well, that's the thing. You can just watch it as a surface level thing. You can watch it as a trans narrative thing, but you can also red pill movement. I really haven't dived that deep into it because it's just disgusting. Like, it's just, they're making it the complete opposite of what they meant it to be. So you can take it the right way, or you can take it no way at all, or you can completely take it the wrong way and co-opt the whole idea, the red pill, blue pill thing. All it is like free your mind or stay. It's like, that's really it. You know what I mean? But it normalize or, all that. But it's like the way that some people have taken this and made this their personality, and an ugly, misogynistic personality, and all this. So that's definitely a side a side effect of this movie. That's not something that's very positive.
Absolutely.
All right, Darren. So what was your topic you wanted to bring up?
Well, that was basically it. I like the idea that it can be anything, or it can be nothing. And that's, to me, and I think you guys agree with me, that's the sign of a great movie. is you can read whatever you want into it. I just don't agree when you take something to make it negative. That's really just
Right.
and make it like weaponize it and use it against people. That's what I don't agree with. But enjoy a movie on your own level. Like, don't tell me tell me how you made it, but it's like, don't tell me how I should enjoy it. It's just, we should all be able to enjoy things on a different, and it's just like, you know, Robert, you mentioned at the beginning, I can't tell you what the Matrix is. You have to decide for yourself. And that's what this movie is. And that's such a great, most movies don't do that. Most movies just, it's this or it's that, and that's it. But this is like, make up your own mind. And I think I love that.
Yeah. Well, the one thing I wanted to bring up, because whenever I watch this movie, I'm always just impressed by the editing that went into it. Like, it's so clean and so crisp, and it's so fun to notice it. Because a lot of times when you're watching a movie, you don't notice the editing because it's you know, it's usually a silent, you know, thing, and if it's done right, you don't notice it. But this is done so well that it's like you can't help but notice it. There's some good edits in this movie, but I do want to point out one that I think is not quite perfect, and it's in the lobby scene.
Okay.
It's when they're, you know, destroying everything and shooting all the bad guys, and then when Neo does the cartwheel and grabs the rifle on the ground, it's not quite perfect. Like when it goes to slow motion to fast motion, when he grabs the gun and then goes back to slow motion, it's not quite perfect. Like, if you look at it really slowly, frame by frame, it's not right where his hand needs to be when he grabs the gun. But it was so impressive when I first saw it. I was like, wow, that was an amazing edit. And so you watch those things throughout the movie, and it's just fun to notice those things. But after seeing it, like, you know, a million times now,
Right.
that one shot always kind of bugs me. It's like, oh, it's not perfect.
Yeah.
What do you guys think of the editing of this movie?
I mean, I think generally, I think it's great. I mean, like I said, they had such a clear vision. There's so much confidence behind the camera on this that, there's very few nitpicks as far as the filmmaking craft, I think, on my end.
Yeah. So here's and we'll we'll come back to the editing when we talk about Resurrections. But what I love about this is, and Yuan Wu Ping, I keep saying his full name because even though I'm half Chinese, I never know if Ping is his first name or Yuan Wu is his first. You know what I mean? So I'm just going to say his full name. But when you watch Hong Kong cinema, when you watch Hong Kong, like the Kung Fu movies, when they cut, it's for a purpose. It's to draw you in closer. It's to like make you feel the impact of the hits. So if they're going to, first of all, I think when you do an action scene, and the John Wick movies do this great, or Mad Max Fury Road did this great, you want to back up and make sure that everybody you can see, and the choreography and the geography is clear, right? So when you're watching a fight scene, I really like that you can see like them actually, you know, punching and moving and all this stuff, and they don't really cut. They have these long takes of them actually in action. But when they do cut, it's for a purpose, and I love that. I love how most people don't realize that about Hong Kong cinema. They just think, oh, it's editing because it's cool, but they're not looking deeper into why they're doing these cuts. And I think having him on hand to do this and make sure that and obviously the Wachowskis know, they're fans of Hong Kong cinema, so they know how to do this. But I just love that idea that all the cuts have impact and they have a purpose. It's not just there to be showy or to cover up stuff that the actors can't do. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
How do you guys feel that since we're talking about sort of the action in this film, how do you feel the visual effects hold up now 24 years later? I know there's a lot of obviously stunt work and practical effects going on in this one. Does any of the CG specifically, I guess, stand out as kind of wonky 2 decades on?
The only thing that I noticed is the hand kind of growing out of the other hand when he changes into the agent or whatever. And like also the face switch when he's like in the helicopter and he kind of like morphs into whenever they morph into an agent, when a normal person in the Matrix morphs into an agent, that always is a little weird for me. But it's still not bad, it's just a little bit weird.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's the only time where it's really wonky. I mean, the Sentinels are fine. It's like a sci-fi kind of atmosphere, and I think they blend well, especially because you usually only see the Sentinels outside, like when they attack. But when they go into the ship and they're, you know, where they're attacking Neo as he's asleep, that it's blended really well. I think that really works. But it's funny, and again, we'll come back to it. Like Reloaded was trying to do new things and trying to animate people. And when they do, I never like that. When they try to animate a human being, it looks so weird and off-putting to me. So it's strange comparing this to the movie that came out 4 years later. I think that Reloaded looks more dated than this because I think they knew what, and Resurrections, when they do the morphing, it's a lot smoother and it's a lot cooler. So they've improved on that. But I think they knew their limitations in this, and so they're convincing enough that I can they're morphing into another person, right? But you're right, Johnny. It does look a little wonky, but it's still strange enough that it works for the tone of the movie. I just think, and Phantom Menace has great special effects. Like, looking back on it, Jar Jar Binks is a great creation, and they've on live sets and they're blending everything well. I just think that this is taking everything that had done before and is trying to one up it and trying to make it better. And so, like I was saying, if you try to be ahead of the curve when you watch a movie 24 years later, that's why it still feels like it's new and fresh. And so I think a lot of movies aren't really trying that.
Well, we talked about how, since we're on special effects, we talked about how this was groundbreaking. Let's talk about bullet time, because that was the thing that blew everybody's mind. And I remember watching the behind the scenes of how they put it together and all the cameras they had lined up and how they had everything choreographed. And just to watch them do that, it was so like, wow, why would we never think of this before? Like, it was so cool and it was so fun. What's your guys' thoughts on bullet time and the impact that had on filmmaking?
I mean, I feel like it was a gift and a curse for this movie in a way, because it set it apart, but then it also then became such a thing that it was parodied to death.
Oh my gosh.
The like Shrek and Scary Movie and for like a decade, everything was taking its shots at bullet time. And I feel like, I don't know if it's had a positive impact on this movie's legacy at this point, because I feel like now everyone just kind of shrugs it off. If you weren't part of the phenomenon when this film came out, like we all were, I feel like you're just like, oh, where they dodged the bullets? Yeah, we get it. Bullet time, whatever. I feel like it maybe had kind of anchors it down in a negative way nowadays, which is, again, something that Resurrection gets into. We need a new bullet time. So I feel like it almost sort of caused a little bit of a backlash over time. But yeah, when we saw it for the first time, nothing like that had ever been done before. And like you said, Johnny, I also watched all the behind the scenes, The Matrix Revisited, got into that pretty deep. And that's why they won the Oscar, was for the bullet time, because it was something nobody had ever seen before.
Well, when you mention Shrek, when it happens in Shrek, that's the reason why I think Shrek is a terrible movie now, because all the jokes are so of the time, and it's like, this was like literally like 22 years ago that this was funny, and it's not funny now. Like, you know what I mean? But in this movie, again, and Robert, Johnny and I did an episode on Terminator 2. Some of the effects in that, when the T-1000 has its head split open, you watch something like that and you're like, what am I watching? Like, you don't know like, I've never seen this before. And so your brain is like, I don't know what's going on. Like, and so it has a hard time. When Trinity, when she does that thing where she jumps and freezes and the camera swoops around her, I don't think there was a soul in that theater that was like, what just happened? What is that? Like, people's minds were blown.
Yeah.
But again, I keep bringing the stupid hoity-toity film snob into it. The way that, I think it's time slice photography, where they just had a bunch of cameras set up and they all snapped at the same time to get the motion, and then they kind of formulated it. That's like Edward Muybridge, like the horse in motion, like we just saw that in Nope. Like, it's a new evolution of that, where Muybridge just took cameras and he took like a bunch of different photos and combined them in like a stop motion thing, I believe, and made the horse look like it was moving. And that was one of the first things of, like, motion pictures, right? So them doing the bullet time is just a next evolution of that. And I think they'd done like forms of bullet time in commercials before we saw it in The Matrix, but I don't know how to describe that. They just integrated it into this movie where it didn't seem like, even though you'd seen it in a commercial, when you see Trinity do that, or you see Neo do that later, you're like, I've never seen this before. I don't know what's your guys' opinion? Is it just that they're doing it on this epic level? Or is it just that we're so swept up in the story? I don't know. Robert, what do you think?
It also has a story function. I mean, especially that scene on the rooftop with Neo. When Trinity does it, it's more of a sort of a cool camera effect. But when it happens with Neo, it's sort of like, the agents are moving faster than he is able to, so it's like him sort of like, it's like in the original Spider-Man movie when he's fighting Flash at the beginning of the movie and he's like, whoa, this is weird. It's like that kind of thing where he's able to sort of move at super speed, and it's slowing it down for the audience to be able to sort of soak in the moment.
Yeah, it's also kind of talked about and foreshadowed in the scene with the Fishburne and the lady in the
Yeah.
red dress simulation, where he means, can I dodge bullets? And then it happens. He's able to dodge bullets.
Right.
But yeah, so like you're right. There's a reason for it. It's part of the
when
theme.
when Trinity does it, it's kind of a curtain raiser. It's to let you know
Yes.
what world you're watching. And so when the agents are able to leap like tall buildings in a single bound, that kind of thing, like it's kind of introducing you to that. And then what I love is they back off after that first, and they give you like the rejection of the call, like the refusal of the call, right? Like Neo sees all this stuff happen, and especially the part where he's talking with Morpheus. And it's that whole thing of the desert of the real, and he's explaining everything that happened to him. And Neo's brain, it can't handle it. You know what I mean? And so I like that it introduces you to that in that first 10 minutes, and it doesn't explain it. And then they back off and they build to that again, where it seems very natural, where it's not just something that anybody, that's the magic realism thing, right? Like you have to introduce a sense of normalcy in order to be able to pull that off. And you guys are right. It's that narrative function of being able, a skill that he's adapting and being able to use to his advantage. And so as opposed to it showing up in a commercial, oh, that was kind of a cool effect. They're using this for a narrative. Right. And again, that's an evolution of that. And so cool. It's such a cool way to do that.
The one thing I will say too is like when you introduce something like this, something this groundbreaking, and you're able to successfully pull it off, your next film, you're expected to do something even better. Like they want to see what else you're going to do. They want to see the next thing, like you said, the next bullet time. Yeah. And I think it's kind of the same what they fell into, and that's maybe why the subsequent films didn't quite hold up. Don't get me wrong, I like a lot of things that are in the other three movies, but they just didn't quite hold up to the original Matrix. And I think that's the same problem that M. Night Shyamalan fell into when he had to constantly have a twist or a better twist in the last movie. It's that same kind of like rut that they fall into as filmmakers when you do something like that.
Well, even if we're talking 90s, even Tarantino did that when he did Pulp Fiction and then he backed off and did Jackie Brown. Like Jackie Brown's much more appreciated now, but I remember when that came out, people were like, what is this? Like, well, how come it's not doing the time jumps? And they weren't like, but it's like, that's literally it. It's like Tarantino, I'm going to tell a story and I don't have to show off as much. So, you know what I mean? It's like, there are different evolutions, and you're right. I think like they did Speed Racer, which is getting like being reevaluated. I like Speed Racer. I think it's fun for what it is again. Robert, you covered with Brian, I think Cloud Atlas,
yeah,
which is not really groundbreaking special effects wise, but they're trying new things with story, and they're trying
it's a crazy expansive narrative, 6 different stories over the course of like thousands of years or
right,
I think. Yeah.
And then like Sense8 they've got on Netflix, stuff like that. So there are trying different things. So in a way, and again, we'll come back to like going back to Resurrections was kind of like, it's like a step backward instead of a step forward. But yeah, I mean, you're right, Johnny. It's like, when you break this much ground, how do you do it again? Like, and how do you, I think Shyamalan's kind of crawling his way back, and he's kind of doing these smaller things that, impressing you with his directing skills. But like, yeah, there was a time there where he just became a one-trick pony, and I think the Matrix sequels kind of do that. They kind of made this seem like a one-trick pony.
Yeah. Well, Rob, do you have any final thoughts or anything else you want to bring up that we haven't mentioned?
Well, we should talk about the performances in this thing. How do you guys feel about Keanu Reeves in this thing? I know obviously we all love Speed on the over here.
Yeah.
And you guys talked about that already. John Wick wouldn't exist without this franchise. You literally get the guns, lots of guns callback, and what is it, Parabellum? And Chad Stahelski was the stunt double for Keanu in this, and then went on to direct the John Wick movies. He shows up in Resurrections. Where does this fit within Speed and John Wick and Bill and Ted and the Keanu Reeves pantheon?
Well, I think he's perfect for this role. And my wife and I were watching it last night, and she was like, I'm so glad it wasn't Will Smith. I'm like, oh, me too. Like, I wouldn't like it if it was Will Smith. I think Keanu Reeves, he is Neo. I mean, you can't find anybody else better to play this part. And it's dry, but there's a reason for that. It's supposed to be dry. It's supposed to be, but he still nails it. Like, he's still like, if you watch closely, he's really thinking about everything that's being said to him, everything he's saying. He's quiet, when he's thinking about it, but like it's there, and you can see the thought process. And so I think it's a great performance, and probably my favorite Keanu Reeves performance, really.
Well, we talked about, I don't know if you heard our Bill and Ted Excellent Adventure episode, Rob, but we talked about Keanu extensively in that, because I love Keanu Reeves. I love what he's just a very cool guy, like in real life, and when you see him on screen. So when he tries to do things, it's like, you can't do an English accent to save your life, right? Like you shouldn't do Shakespeare. It's that kind of thing. But he's trying to do these different things. But when he does this, I think it's the 1-2 punch of maybe 1-2-3 punch of Point Break and Speed, and then this, and then John Wick obviously was like, by the time John Wick shows up, you're like, yeah, this is Keanu's role, right? Like, but I think Neo has that the woe, like the Bill and Ted, like he was always hired for. It has that, but then he's so cool and he's so stoic. I think he's even cooler in Reloaded. I think like he's just so elegant, and he's so much fun to watch, and it's just he's just got the body language. And you're right, it's like it is a journey, and he is thinking of things, and there is a difference between him at the beginning, like kind of lost, and him at the end being the super confident, uber cool guy. So it's a very cool journey, I think. And then, if we're talking about like Fishburne and Carrie-Anne Moss, I don't know, like it's a perfect melding of everything. I think they were going to get maybe Val Kilmer to be Morpheus when it was Will Smith, and that was just been weird. I just think that everything works. What do you guys think of, Fishburne first? I think this is his signature role. He's got that voice, that booming voice, and he's also good at the action. And he sells everything to the idea that when he's getting, I love the idea that he's so confident that Neo's the one. So when Neo goes to see the Oracle and she tells him, no, you're not, like, I think it's just to test him. But like, what makes the scene where Morpheus is attacked by Smith, what makes it so, you feel it. I don't think you feel tension or like there's stakes as much in the second 2 Matrix movies. When Morpheus is being beat up, because he's so blindly following his beliefs, that when you see him getting beat up, it's like, Morpheus, you're dying because of a false belief, right? That's part of why that makes it so interesting. But I think this is maybe his signature role. He's just great. What did you guys think?
No, I agree. I love Morpheus. Morpheus is one of my favorite characters in this franchise. And Fishburne brings such a calm sense of authority to so much of it. And it's interesting to me now, especially with the hindsight of the entire franchise to this point, how much this movie is really Neo figuring out his place in this world, figuring out whether the toys, obviously, with whether he is or isn't the one. There's numerous times where like, oh, he's not. Oh, yes, he is. Wait, no, he's not. He's dead. Oh, yes, he is. He's fine. Which I think is really fun. But it's also him sort of navigating his relationship, his connection, the dynamic with him and Morpheus, with him and Trinity, with him and Smith. And it's really those sort of that trio of relationships with Neo that kind of informs and fuels this story, but also everything going forward. I think all 4 of those actors are tremendously well cast. I think Hugo Weaving, who I hadn't really seen in anything up to this point, so much fun. One of the best things about the next 2 movies, for sure, because he's really leaning into it and really hamming it up and really going over the top, which makes sense because this character is bound by a set of rules, as they say in the movie, and little by little sort of like losing it, and by the sequels completely off the grid. And then Carrie-Anne Moss, who I also wasn't familiar with prior to this movie. What a great discovery she is. And they have such instant chemistry. That moment in the nightclub when he follows DeJour's White Rabbit tattoo to the club, and we get the Rob Zombie music I was referencing earlier, and they have that moment like in the she corners him in the club, and they're talking about the question that drives us, Neo, and all that stuff. Like that's like they have such, I don't know, they just have instant chemistry. I don't know how many people they read off of, but at one point Jada Pinkett Smith was up for Trinity and did like a chemistry read with Neo, and it just wasn't there. It's such a perfect match. It's hard now to see, like what you were saying, Darren, it's so hard to see anyone else in that role of Neo, but really any of these. Joe Pantoliano, I want to make sure we give a shout out to him, who's also in Bound, so great as Cypher. And Gloria Foster, as you mentioned, is the Oracle.
So fun. Yeah,
like,
she's
one
rascal.
scene and she kills it. One of it's such a memorable scene, and it's one scene in this movie. And that character is so pivotal to the narrative, like as you were alluding. And it's even all the supporting players, we don't get as much obviously of Switch and APOC and Dozer and Marcus Chong's tank doesn't return for the other ones. There was a little bit of a fallout with the Wachowskis after this movie. But even all of those guys, I think they all really work, the supporting cast.
Yeah, John. I want to get your cluster of the actors too, but like Carrie-Anne Moss, it's another Sandra Bullock thing. Like it's just instant chemistry. It's like like when you click with Keanu, you click with Keanu, and they adore him, right? And so and he gives as much as he takes. So it's all like a symbiotic. Like he's a very generous actor, and I do like Pants is great. Obviously, nobody eats steak. It says ignorance is bliss, like Joey Pants. And then Hugo Weaving, like once you see him in this, you're like, who is this guy? Like you love to hate him, and he's having so much fun. And I think in Revolutions, his cookie monologue, that cookie makes that whole movie worth it. Just that one scene makes the whole movie worth it. But like Johnny, what do you think of all the rest of the actors that we're talking about? Like, who's the stand?
Yeah, I agree with both of you. I think they all did a really good job. I mean, like you said, Fishburne as Morpheus is great. Carrie-Anne Moss is Trinity, and I agree with you. The chemistry is there definitely, and I love them all. I do think I enjoy watching Hugo Weaving the best. When his scenes come on, I just kind of light up, and I just get really excited about those scenes because it's so fun to watch him play Andy Smith. But yeah, they all did a great job. Darren, any final thoughts from you, or anybody else want to say something else before we?
Well, I want to get like again, this being Robert's favorite movie, I really want to give him the final word here. But like, there's so many. I'm not kidding you guys. Like you could watch this movie like 10 times or 100 times and pick up something new every time. This time rewatching it, I really loved it. Like they show mirrors, and it's all about self-reflection. When he goes to see the Oracle, she says, "What does that say? Like what Tempest Future, whatever. Know thyself.
Know thyself."
Yeah, right. And so that's self-referential. To the point where the music even does that the Matrix theme, that 2-note theme, it's a reflection. Like one note rises, the other falls, or falls rises, and it's one note does one thing and the other does the opposite. So it's a mirror image of that tone, of that note. Even the music is feeding into those themes, and I just think so well thought out. There's so much thought put into this movie that makes it more than just a punch sci-fi extravaganza. So I really I love it. So that's love it more than, I don't know. I love it more than I did that first day, like I said. And it's one of those things where its impact is, you don't realize the impact it's going to have until like 24 years later, when the fourth sequel comes out and you're like, whoa, like that first movie really, really made a stamp. So yeah, I just love that you can read a lot of the stuff, a lot of different things into it.
All right, Rob, let's get your final word.
So, like we were saying earlier, this movie, I don't know if I've seen it 100 times over 24 years. I probably am getting relatively close to that number. I'm glad you mentioned the score, Darren, because Don Davis' score in this movie and all of the first three movies is so strong, and really, it's, I think, an underrated element of this film for sure, that like a lot of people don't give the full credit to. But this movie, I mean, it opened my eyes to like what movies could do and could be, world where anything is possible. I feel like I'm trying to still defend this on Binge Movies, unsuccessfully. But the symbolism, the allegory, everything we said, obviously some of it is pretty on the nose. His friend says, "You're my savior, man, my own personal Jesus Christ." It's like, okay, we get it. The battery thing, it's very, mythological and spiritual and philosophical. All those things that 15-year-old Rob had no clue about, and which really sort of informed my love for this movie. The questions of, is it destiny? Is it fate? What is it? What is the nature of reality? How do you define real? All those things that make you sort of live life a little bit more critically, try and sort of, follow who you are, be true to yourself. It's such, I think that's part of what too, I'm getting close to 40 next month. I'm going to be hitting 40 years old. And it's like, still this movie and its themes still resonate with me. It's, it's all about sort of, trying to figure out who you are and your place in the world. And I think that's a journey that, for a lot of us never really ends. It's constantly evolving. So every time you watch this movie, I think that's a big part of why you see something different every time you watch it, because you're different every time you watch it. And so what the allegory is, whether it's, I need to find a new career path, or, I'm in this relationship that just doesn't work, or, why don't I'm not being true to my own sexuality or belief system or whatever it might be. Like I think that can change over time, and I think a lot of that is reflected in this movie. Plus all the, like we said, there's the Western influence, there's the noir, the cool sci-fi. Man, I wish I could download knowledge into my head in a blink of an eye and immediately know everything I need to know. There's all of that stuff. There's the horror elements, the like this body snatchers vibes with the agents at times, which I think is really cool. But then it's still a movie that ends on such a like earnest, corny line as "You can't be dead because I love you," and you're like, I'm bought into it. Sure,
Yep,
it's true. Love conquers all. It has such a positive beating heart behind it. In addition to all the stuff that I mentioned in the cast, and yeah, it's the kind of movie that gets better with age. I saw it in when they re-released it for the 20th anniversary in 2019. I went to see it in theaters for the first time in 20 years, and it was just like, no, perfect movie, no notes. I don't have nothing for you. It just held up so remarkably, and it never fails to impress me when I put this thing on. That it's like, yeah, I know so much. I know it so well, and yet it still sort of surprises me. And that's how you know a movie is truly timeless.
yeah.
And yeah, so that's why I was so glad that you guys had me on to talk about it, because I'm like, I got lots to say about The Matrix. You know, and even, you know, even with this cast, Carrie-Anne Moss and Joe Pantoliano were in Memento, another giant, huge, like mind-breaking movie for me that came out just a year or two later. But yeah, I keep going on and on about how great this thing is.
Yeah. Well, I definitely agree with both of you. A very, very well-made movie. Definitely made a stand, made a mark, and it's just, like you say, it gets better with every viewing. So thanks, Robert, for joining us and bringing all of your knowledge of this movie to our show. We appreciate that. And where can people find you and your podcast, and give us a shout out about all that's going on in your life right now?
Yeah, definitely. First of all, thanks guys for having me back on again, especially for this movie. You can find me, you can find Crooked Table Productions, again, Close Watch and Franchise Detours on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Good Pods, and other podcatchers, as well as crookedtable.com. I'm on Twitter at Crooked Table.
All right, great. All right, Darren. Well, I know you mentioned you want to talk about the sequels, so maybe we'll do that during our outro topic.
Okay, sounds good.
All right. Thanks again, Robert. Appreciate it, man.
Thanks, guys.
You have to let it all go, Neil. Fear, doubt, and disbelief. Free your mind.
All right, Darren, we're back. So, and Robert is still here.
Yeah. How do we get this? Happened with Brian when we had him on. Like, we can't get him off. Like, I think, what is this? Like, I'm trying to press the. Nope, I can't. I can't get him off. I think it's just when you come back onto the podcast, it's like the Zoom is like, oh, he's going to stay on for as long as I can keep him. I think that's just what it's doing. So, hey, Robert, how about you join us for a conversation about the Matrix sequels? How does that sound?
Absolutely. I'm part of the system now, guys.
That's right. We can't get him off. He's going to be here even when we log off. It's every time. All right. So, Johnny, how do you want to organize this? Like, do we want to rank them? Do you just want to talk about them or what?
Well, Darren, since you just saw the fourth one, why don't you talk about that one? I wouldn't mind talking about the second one. And then, Rob, if you have any thoughts on the third one.
Okay, sure. We could all share our thoughts too.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I'm just saying
kind of lead the conversation. But yeah, I was kind of I watched Resurrections for the first time last night. I'm not I'm not a fan because I know that Revolutions it really didn't endear people, and people got tired of. I know I got tired of the Matrix by the time that third one came out. So when they do something like this to like maybe course correct or make it better, or well, we didn't do a good enough job, let's do it again, that kind of thing. You know, X-Files coming back or all these different things where it's just nothing's ever dead, right? And I wasn't looking forward to seeing it because I don't want to. What if the movie's terrible? Like when I heard they were making it, I'm like, but what if it's terrible? Like, what's the point of making it if like it's just going to sour the reputation even more? Like, what's the point of getting excited about that? So just and again, I think I need to go back and watch it a couple times. It's that kind of movie. But just my initial thoughts is I thought it was interesting. I thought it's a more interesting idea than what they did for the sequels. Let's just say that. I like the idea of, I think it's a very natural progression of taking it and making it meta and like, well, what does the Matrix mean? And doing this kind of story, I think works for it. But the two negative things that maybe three, but the first thing that I noticed is like, number one, it didn't have the same wow factor that the first Matrix has. Like, it doesn't have that, right? I get that, and that's why I think the meta kind of POV kind of works for it, because it's kind of taking, and so you're not trying to just one up yourself, you're trying to maybe comment on it. The other thing was that, and I guess just two things, but like the action scenes are no way. I know that instead of Yin Wu Ping, they got Stahelski, I think, or somebody from the John Wicks choreographed these fights. And yeah, you can tell there's moves, but there's so many quick cuts, and it just seemed like instead of backing off and showing the impressiveness of the fights, they kept like trying to wow us with like pretty shots or impressive cuts. And so the action, and I don't know, is that the point of the, like, is that the point of the movie, that you're not supposed to be that into the action because it's also commenting on it? And I like that attitude of like the love that Neo and Trinity have for each other. Like they keep like they keep having to separate them because they just, something, their bond is so strong that it kind of destroys everything else. So I like that, and it's a very heartfelt movie. But I don't know, I just felt like it was too, I don't know, it was too up its own ass, I guess, trying to comment on things instead of just telling me a story. What did you guys think of Resurrections?
Well, I agree with you. I agree with that.
Well, I'm the most positive here then for Resurrections. I like it a lot. I think obviously it's one of those movies that when I saw it in theaters, the person I saw it with was like, well, that was terrible. And I was like, I don't know, it kind of worked for me.
Yeah.
It's the whole meta thing, it either works for you or it doesn't.
Yeah.
And like some people are gonna get a kick out of that, and some people are gonna be immediately turned off. The fact that this whole movie, the whole scene with the Warner Brothers thing, and then Christina Ricci for some reason, for 30 seconds being like, oh, all great things to think about as we talk about if we make Matrix 4, and who knows how many more. It feels like Lana kind of reconciling with the 2 decades plus history of this franchise and its legacy and what it means and what they're trying to say with it. And it's one of those things that works for me, but if people don't like it, I can't really fault them for that, because what it tries is so different and so kind of out there. And I do think that Lana is way more concerned with the story and the characters and the meta commentary than the action. I think that definitely shows. Like, there's action in this, but they're not, it feels like it's not given the same care and attention as a lot of the other elements of the film. I think that there's a lot of interesting representations of characters that we know. I think that this also suffers a bit because of no Hugo Weaving, because of no Lawrence Fishburne. Like, it's easy to have seen those actors playing those roles still. But the movie, I think, really has something to say about, like you were saying, Darren, the stories never end. We're still, Groff has a whole, we're still telling stories never end, do they? We're still telling the same stories with just different names, different faces, that whole thing. It's sort of about the enduring power of mythology and the fact that they lean into exactly sort of touching on a lot of what we've talked about for this first movie already on this podcast, I think is really, it makes it stand alone. And it's like, if they were to have just continued Revolutions and just gone straight into the second half of this movie with, oh, we found Neo and spoilers, Niobe is here, and we're just continuing that story, I feel like that would have been so much worse. And I think that, Darren, you already seem like you're more positive than a lot of people on this, because you already said it, you at least conceded that it's interesting, and that in and of itself, I think there's no world in which this was going to be better than the first one. And I think people needed to sort of walk in with that expectation sort of set. And I think maybe that's also part of why I was pleasantly surprised by this, is because I was never expecting this movie to be as good as the first one. I don't think that's lightning in a bottle. You're not going to be able to do that. Look at how many Jurassic Park movies have they made? How many have gotten anywhere near the first one? Or Terminator films or whatever. Like, you're lucky if you get one or two that really connect. You're never going to get to that same place. Are you going to do something different with it, something interesting, and have something to say? That's really where my focus lies. Plus, when I really love a franchise, this is probably why I have a podcast called Franchise Detours, it takes a lot for me to be like, nope, I'm done, closing the book, I'm walking away. And so this, for me, this is actually probably my second favorite of the 4 Matrix films, because it does have something different to say. I do like a lot of the characters. Jessica Hennick as Bugs, I think, is really fun addition to this world. And all the, you know, the Neo and Trinity romance really becomes such a focus in this, and I find that really poignant, particularly to the point that for Lana, at least, a lot of her rationale was they were planning on doing Matrix movies without the Wachowskis involved. That's, I'm pretty sure, word for word from a meeting at Warner Brothers, that scene. They're going to do it with or without us, so they'll kill our contract or whatever. Like, there was talk of a Morpheus film with Michael B. Jordan or something, that maybe a prequel, maybe whatever. For her, I think she chose, Lily didn't want to go backwards and kind of retread the same ground. And for Lana, she sort of saw it as an opportunity, like, to bring back these two characters that meant so much to their careers. They had lost their, the Wachowskis lost their parents sort of in the last few years. And I think she sort of posed some of that. This is sort of her way of kind of working through that grief. Is like, well, I'm going to give Neo and Trinity the happy ending, you know, if nothing else. And I don't know, that works for me. I'm a softie. So all of this stuff really works for me. Obviously, I'm bought in on this franchise. So I'm in the minority that appreciates it for what it's trying to do, even flaws and all.
Well, Johnny, we could probably do a whole episode on Resident. There's a lot to talk about with this.
It went on for a while.
No, you're good. But that's one reason why I liked it. Again, it's the same thing, Johnny, that you were talking about. It's like, are you going to try to one up the action? Like, no, there's no way you can do that. So I like that this is a movie about ideas. The Bugs is an IP. I like that that's a comment on the IP, you know, that kind of thing. And the empathy that this movie has. There's the feeling of the relationship between Neo and Trinity has an empathy and a lasting impression that I don't think they had as much in the first 3 movies. But yeah, it's at least interesting. And you're right. It's like, it's either a take it or leave it kind of affair. So I'm like I said, I'll need to watch it a few more times before I can really settle what I think.
Yeah. Well, I will say this briefly. I went into it with an open mind. I wanted to like this movie. I wanted to be on board with it. And then as soon as the whole meta thing happened, that's when I checked out. I was
understandable.
And so I was like, all right, I'm done. I was just waiting for it to be over at that point. But yeah, I mean, it's still interesting. Still got some cool stuff in there. I will give them that. But yeah, it's not really for me. That one's not for me.
Okay. Well, what about Reloaded then?
Reloaded, yeah. I will say I like that one. I think they actually did kind of like up their game a little bit with some of the action sequences and the fight scenes were still really, really well done. And it's still really fun to watch. I love the twins characters too. When they show up, that was a lot of fun. I thought that was a great idea. And the whole freeway chase scene and all that stuff, and just the choreography, the car accidents and the car jumps, and building the whole freeway just for that scene. It was just, again, I thought it was really, really well done. Just a really fun movie. So I was happy with Reloaded.
Robert, what do you think of Reloaded?
I think Reloaded and Revolutions have this same problem which is that the Wachowskis, to me, it felt like they fell in love with their own mythology a little too much. And they were just like, what if there's ghosts? What if there's werewolves? What if there's this? You know, and I think it maybe stretches it a bit too far, sort of tumbling down the rabbit hole of their own imagination a little bit with those. I also feel like the fact that, and I mean, Chad Stahelski has pretty much admitted as much, that they were supposed to do John Wick 4 and 5 back to back. And he was like, no, we're doing one movie, because every time I've been involved in a back-to-back production, what ends up happening is that the 2 movies just feel like one long movie. And I think that's exactly what happened here. Like, I think I've mentioned on my podcast before that it feels to me like, if had I the time and the video editing skills, I would love to take Reloaded and Revolutions and cut it down to one movie, because for me, really, that would have worked well as the 3rd movie of the trilogy, with a middle chapter that sort of developed Neo's, you know, skills and character a bit more from, you know, he's reborn at the end of the first one, and then all of a sudden he's Superman and he's invulnerable. And so you lose the stakes for that for a lot of the film as well. That being said, we do get Gloria Foster back as the Oracle. The freeway chase, I think, the freeway chase, I think, is pretty universally considered the pinnacle, like the best sequence of those 2 sequels for sure. I think that there's a lot of interesting questions. That movie really kind of expands upon the whether or not he's the one being, well, what does being the one even mean? And essentially the end of that film with the off-mocked sequence with the architect is the whole thing is saying, well, you know, the hero's journey, that's all BS. Like, that's just a construct of control, another measure of control. And I feel like that's another moment, like the meta stuff from the fourth film, that you're either like, you're on board, or you're like, no, what is this? Now we're just sitting here having a conversation with this dude. And those two movies, they just feel Reloaded specifically. There's sequences where in the first one, the ideas and the story are perfectly enmeshed, and the scenes with the Oracle or whatever, when they stop, when the action stops and they have a conversation, they're propelling the story forward. In The Matrix Reloaded, there are entire sequences where you're like, good idea, like nice, you know, philosophy, you know, seminar we have going on here, but what the hell does any of this have to do with anything? That happens at least a few times, and I enjoy those scenes, but it slows the pace of the movie down significantly. I'm thinking, I mean, specifically the thing of the Merovingian in the restaurant, and the you know, the slice of cake that he sends to the woman and all that. Like, there's so many sequences in that movie specifically where I'm like, what does this have to?
What?
Why?
Yeah.
What? Yeah, you could have made 3-line exchange and then moved on. Like, what are we doing here? It just feels like it's being stretched too thin.
Well, watching Reloaded, and I think like I was so hyped for Reloaded just because The Matrix had started working its magic on me by then. And yeah, watching those scenes and the action stuff and the Burly Brawl, even though it's like, you know, it's kind of wonky, but I like the idea of it. It's cool to watch. It's impressive. I think that the Reloaded, it does one up the action. I like the action better in Reloaded just because of the way they're taking so many chances. And yeah, the freeway chases, it's what's great about that is it starts as they're trying to outrun the twins, and now they're trying to outrun the agents, and now there's a fight. It escalates like in a Spielbergian way. So I love that stuff. Yeah. My problem with Reloaded, and watching it now, it's especially egregious because it's so weird how they have these lyrical, beautiful action sequences that are interspersed with these long, drawn out, static scenes of our heroes sitting there while somebody monologues at them for 10 minutes. And it's like, whoa, like, what is it's such a weird disparity. And you're right, Robert, like the way that all the exposition is so interesting and it's tied in and it's narrative function, it's all that. And it works propelling the story forward. I like that you said it that way. In Reloaded, it stops the movie cold so they can philosophize about stuff. Mm-hmm. And then back to an action scene that really has nothing to do with what they were just talking about. Right. I do like the scene where Neo's fighting the Merovingian guys. My problem with that scene, even though it has a lot of symbolism going on, is when you've seen Neo fight 100 Agent Smiths, why are we sitting for 5 minutes watching him fight these 5 know-nothings? Like, it's, you know how it's going to end. I thought it would have been so much funnier if they cut to them running after the Keymaster or whatever his name was, and then it cuts back and Neo's just decimated him. You don't have to see it. He's just won. I like that. But you know what I mean? I like the action, but it was like, what? Like, you're just showing off at this point, that kind of thing. And the only scene I do like is when they're talking to the architect. He's talking nonsense. And it's like they took a regular dialogue scene and they just thesaurus the shit out of it. You know what I mean?
He's supposed to be a machine. So it's all like technical. Yeah, it's like technically he's making sense. Yeah. But he's going about it in such a long-winded way because because he's a program and that's how he thinks.
And I have figures. I have a blast with that scene just because it's so ridiculous. I think it's hilarious just watching this guy go on and on and on, just so Neo can go, yeah, I'm out. You know, I'm going to go save Trinity. So I like all that stuff. It's just, I don't know. It's just Reloaded was such a weird experience.
What about the whole Zion sequence, the rave scene in Reloaded?
I actually don't mind it. I think what I like, especially about Reloaded, besides the action, is it takes everything from the first Matrix and it tosses it out the window. It's like the proverbial Luke Skywalker tossing the lightsaber behind him, right? It's like Morpheus isn't this high and mighty guy. He's a crackpot. You know what I mean? There's not just the one. There's like multiple ones. Like they worship Neo, and Neo's uncomfortable with it because he, like they say in Resurrections, it's like, I never believed I was the one, but it's Trinity that believed in me. And so that's what gave me the power, right? So I just like how they turn everything on its head. So the Zion stuff it's giving you the world. You know what I mean? So I don't know. Johnny, what did you think about that Zion stuff?
I remember it kind of slowed the movie down, but it didn't really bother me.
At least
Like-
they're not just sitting there monologuing at each other. There's stuff going on.
No,
you know?
they're standing and writhing around.
Yeah,
but
sweating at each other.
there's also too many new characters that those two
Yeah.
movies add. And there's like, Link and Z and the kid and all these other, like all these characters that it expands the world, but they're also, now we're spending time with characters we don't really care about as much. It's like you expand the scope of the first movie, which is very isolated on the Nebuchadnezzar's crew, and that's it. Like you have your, your 6 or 7 heroes on that ship that most of them get picked off in relatively quick succession. Like 2/3 of the way through. And then here it's just, there's all these other characters sort of stealing, screen time from Neo and Trinity and Morpheus, that it kind of bogs it down. I also feel like these sequels in a way sort of almost misread the first film, because at the end of the movie, he's saying, I'm going to free these people. I'm going to show them a world without you, a world without borders and boundaries and all that stuff. Right. And then in this movie, and Revolutions, he's trying to achieve peace. Freedom and peace are not the same thing.
No.
And I don't know where that got lost in translation. But it just, there's a lot of it that kind of sits weirdly with me. So the 2 and 3 have been always kind of a mixed bag.
Well, I want to say this, and then I want to Sieg and Robert into let's have a cohesive conversation about Revolutions, not just tie it in with Reloaded. But
right.
When you talk about the new characters, when they introduce the Merovingian, when they introduce Monica Bellucci's character, what's her name? Persephone, right? When did you just introduce her? When these people that they're introducing in a second movie, you think that they'd have a bigger, stronger part in the third one, and they don't. Like the Merovingian shows up in one scene, and Trinity calls him Merv. And then that's it. And then so I was like, well, that was pointless. Like this whole thing is, why'd you introduce these characters for no reason? You know what I mean? I like the Jada Pinkett Smith. I like the Harry Lennox characters. I like how they're introducing them. But like, there's like way too many things. So it does lose the focus. But like, as a movie itself, Robert, what do you think about Revolutions? How does it rank with the rest of the franchise?
Revolutions is my least favorite of the 4. I think
so.
Just, there's so little in that movie that feels like it's cut from the same cloth as the first film, as far as the imagination, as far as the originality, as far as the vision of that first movie. You get to the third one and they spend half the movie fighting the Sentinels with these mech suits that look like they're just straight out of Aliens. It's just, it spends too much time in the real world. The whole premise of this franchise that makes it so interesting is that sort of dichotomy between the Matrix and the real world. But that whole movie's in the real world. It's just this extended battle sequence with characters that we barely know and don't care about. And I like the stuff early on better. I like the scene with Neo at the train station, and he runs to one side and he ends up on the other side, and he's like, shit. And the train man and Sati and her parents, is that really beautiful speech that her father, Sati's father, makes about love. Love isn't the love I have for my daughter, talking about the nature of love and how machines can have that sort of empathy for one another. That's all really but the whole cliffhanger at the end of 2 with Neo getting sort of lost in the Matrix, and his consciousness being sort of separated from his physical form, and then Smith sort of crossing over through Bane, which I still don't understand how that makes sense, even within the rules of this franchise. He infects Bane with, I don't even understand, and crosses over his consciousness into the real world. That just feels like something that was designed to extend the story out to 4 hours instead of 2 hours or 2.5 hours. It feels like it's just Much Ado About Nothing, to reference another Keanu movie, I guess. It just feels like, like you said, that cliffhanger is resolved so quickly in the beginning of the third one. They go there, they pull a gun on Merovingian, and he's like, okay, just kidding, here he is. And they'll proceed with the rest of the movie. Like, you could have taken towards the end of Reloaded off, towards the beginning of Revolutions, and had a better film that was a little more focused. But that being said, Smith is completely unhinged in Revolutions, more so than ever before, and I am so here for it. The whole thing with, like you said, the cookie monologue, the scene there with the Oracle, where he has that one of cinema's greatest evil laughs right into the camera, like extreme close up. Hugo Weaving having a blast, and I love that that the super burly brawl I think is really fun, even though it's way over the top and crazy with the CG. I do love that Neo ultimately is victorious because he submits. I think that's an interesting character decision. It's sort of like you mentioned Last Jedi already, like the Luke Skywalker sort of sacrificing himself for the cause at the end of the Last Jedi. I think it ends in an interesting place. It's particularly with the way it ties back to the first film, where he's like, "You were right, Smith. You were always right. It was inevitable." I think all of that is kind of ties in beautifully. So I like the finale part of it. It's just there's a lot of saggy things in the middle of that film that weigh it down for me.
Johnny, I've got some thoughts, but what do you think of Revolutions and the two movies?
I've only seen the third one a few times, maybe 2 times actually. And so, to be honest, I kind of stopped paying attention after the second one. Like there was a lot that I just didn't really care. Not that I didn't understand it. I was just kind of like, I don't care to understand it. I don't. They're saying things that don't really matter anymore. Like you were saying, there's a lot of things that are just kind of they missed a lot, and so I kind of like tuned out. And I kept going back to the thought that it probably could have been a standalone film. Like you didn't really need the rest of it. It could have been just The Matrix, the first one, and then we really didn't need much after that. Like you could decide for yourself whether or not Neo goes and saves those people, or whether or not what happens next in the story. You don't really need to see the rest of it. And I think that's kind of where I stand. Like The Matrix is by far the best out of the four. There are things I like about all of them, but like they just don't compare to the first one.
Well, here's my thing is when you do, and it's weird because I compare this trilogy, compare it to Star Wars, first of all. Like Revolutions is the rescue Han Solo whole opening, right? Of Return of the Jedi. It's like, Pirates of the Caribbean does that same thing where they have to rescue Jack Sparrow at the beginning of the third one. Yep. So obviously Star Wars is a reference, but I compare these sequels and I kind of lump them. It's the Back to the Future trilogy and the Pirates trilogy, where they're all kind of the same pointlessness. Like, just like you were saying, Johnny, like the story ends. After the first one, the story has ended satisfactorily. When you try to do sequels, you have to reintroduce new elements to keep it going. Like in The Matrix, all of a sudden Neo is dreaming. All of a sudden has dreams that like of Trinity dying and the machines are digging, that kind of thing. With Back to the Future, it's like, where in the hell did Marty's chicken thing come from? If that's such a huge deal, where was it in the first one? Like they just introduced this thing out of the blue. It's like, what? And same thing with Pirates. It's like, oh, his compass can tell things. The thing is, like, I like parts of the Back to the Future sequels. I like parts of the Pirates of the Caribbean sequels, but the story had already sufficiently ended. And you're just beating a dead horse. It's just more stuff that we don't need. And yeah, Back to the Future 2 and 3 function as one movie. Pirates 2 and 3 function as one movie. Reloaded and Revolutions function as one movie. And I didn't need them. It's like, you already told me a story and I was already into it. And by the end of Revolutions, when they're fighting and they flip onto the ceiling and it was like, oh, this is what we're going to do to show me something different. And I checked out. I was like, I think I'm done. You know what I mean? I'm like, I've wrung everything out of this and I don't care anymore. And even the green blue stuff, I was like, yeah, that was cool once. It's like, what are you doing with it now? I liked in Resurrections how there's a part where Jonathan Groff as Smith is looking outside and he's like, it's so beautiful that it's almost fake. And from that moment on, all the exterior shots looked beautiful, but fake to me. I thought that was a cool aesthetic in Resurrections that they were going for. But in this, when they're doing the green blue thing for the third time, it's like, what else do you got, guys? What else do you have for me? And the fact that they're so anti-machine and they use machines to fight the machines. I don't know. I just thought there was at least Return of the Jedi was like the Ewoks, kind of the caveman, like trying to go against technology. It's like, why are you having machines fight machines? Isn't that like hypocritical? Like the whole ending was like completely lost for. I don't know. So yeah, it's just the sequels are superfluous. I didn't need them, even though I have a lot of some things in it that I want. And yeah, Resurrections might be my second favorite of the franchise, but I don't think I'm going to go revisit any particular scene. I will go and reload it and watch the freeway chase again. I will watch the Burly Brawl again because they're cool and I'm impressed by it. But anything else in all the other movies, unless it's Resurrection story, I'm just the first one was good enough. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, anyway.
All right, Darren, is that it? Did we make it? We made it to the end of.
I think we made it. And Robert stuck around. I still can't. I'm trying to click him off. Like I was trying to kick him off in the middle. He's talking about Revolutions, and I couldn't do it. So yeah, he's still here.
Don't get me going. We'll be here another hour talking
we'll
about
keep doing
Resurrections. Well,
it's what the main thing that I like about the Matrix is there's so much to read into it. You can even we could talk about how much the stuff we didn't like about the second two sequels, the two that followed after it, and make that a whole episode. But it's like these are at least have some thought processes that it's trying to put you through. So that's at least something. I don't know. So, but yeah, like without them, the world would not be different.
Right.
You know what I mean? So
yeah. Even though I enjoy all four of these to varying degrees, like it's pretty clear the first one, and then everything else is like there's a big drop off there for sure.
Yeah,
I would agree with that.
Yeah. But yeah, Robert, thank you for sticking around for our outro topic. It's like
absolutely, you'll never get rid of me.
Yeah, we had such a fun time at the American Tale, and again, you're one of my favorite people on Twitter. So I mean, we've become really good friends, and it's been a pleasure getting to know you and chatting with you and just like-minded stuff. And I'm glad that I was able to force this on Johnny so you can chat about the Matrix. But yeah,
we'll have you back for sure if you want to come back.
Absolutely, yeah, anytime, guys.
Yeah,
anytime.
Absolutely. We'd love it.
All right, Darren. Then for NostalgiaCast, I'm Johnny Craddock.
You don't want to we want to make Robert feel guilty about what we're going to talk about next time? We're not talking about anything.
Do it.
Well, what we're doing is we're having just our season finale episode, right? I think we wanted to come back and Robert, I'm going to need your top 10 90s movies so we can read that on air. But like, yeah, we're just going to come back and we're going to have like a chat about the season and all the fun we had, especially with fun guests like you, Robert, and maybe get like input from other people in their lists of other 90s movies and stuff like that. So yeah, I do want to have kind of a wrap up. We're not going to talk about a specific movie, but yeah, I think it'd be fun to kind of wrap up the season. And if Robert's still here when we come back on, fine. We can still but yeah.
Well, I was going to say I know Kung Fu. So
I still know Kung Fu.
Robert, you got anything you want to add?
Any quotes? What's your favorite quote?
Oh God.
We're putting him on the spot.
I always got a major kick out of Smith saying when he gets real with Morpheus and he takes his headset off and he's like, I'm gonna be as honest, forthcoming with you as I can or whatever. And he's like, I hate this place, this reality, whatever you want to call it. He's like, oh my God. He's like, it's the smell, if there is such a thing. And then he rubs his hand on Morpheus' sweaty head and makes him smell it. It always cracks me up. I'm like, wow, this guy is going through some stuff. So pretty much everything Smith says in these movies, but particularly that scene that was struck me as funny.
All right. So Johnny says, I know Kung Fu. I say I still know Kung Fu. And then Robert just wipes the sweat from Morpheus.
That's right. It's a smell. It's repulsive, isn't it?
All right. Yeah. Again, thank you, Robert. We had a great time. And we'll see everybody else next time.